back to the SDG Warriors Podcast. I'm Simar Mohanty, the team lead and student coordinator of the SDG Warriors. We are a team of passionate student changemakers and STEMnists on a mission to meet the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, leveraging the power of STEM education and 21st century skills. Brought to you by us SDG Warriors, this podcast aims to provide inspiring stories from edu heroes and STEM experts from across the world, ideal for students, teachers, parents, and pretty much anybody interested in STEM education and social impact. This podcast aims to provide enriching learning experiences and drive positive change in local, global, and digital communities. Well, today we are going to be in conversation with someone who's channeling the spirit of the guardians of the galaxy. And she's channeling her spirit as well as assembling a diverse team of young heroes to defend Earth's biodiversity against the forces of environmental destruction. It's a cosmic mission, but a grounded and a grassroots level. So please join me in welcoming Miss Callie Broaddus, an award-winning conservationist, filmmaker, and photographer based in Washington, D.C. And to give an overview, as the founder and executive director of Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, Miss Callie leads initiatives that empower young people to protect threatened species and habitats through conservation. And she has spent 7 years as a senior designer at National Geographic Kids. She combined the power of storytelling, wildlife photography, and her passion for youth education over there. And from photographing rhinos in Botswana to documenting sea level rises in Marshall Islands, Miss Callie has been recognized as the inaugural class of the Explorers Club 50, the 50 people who are changing the world that the world need to know about. Well, Miss Callie, we are absolutely thrilled to have you on our show today.
I'm really glad to be here.
Well,
wow, and it all sounds so cool when you say it like that.
Well, I'm super excited. And before we dive into today's conversation, Miss Callie, to help our listeners audibly visualize the entire conversation, can you tell us where are you located, what is the weather like outside, and what can you see from your window right now?
Okay, I'm in Warrenton, Virginia, which is sort of like the rural kind of horse country area about an hour west of Washington, D.C. I'm normally in D.C. And outside, I'm ashamed to say I haven't stepped outside yet today, but it's been pretty cold lately. We had our last day at 0 Celsius, our last night at 0 Celsius recently. So I'm hoping that we're looking towards spring. And I am looking out over a meadow and a horse pasture.
Well, that sounds amazing, Miss Callie, and completely different from the condition here in Bangalore, India. The summers have began here, so it's a cozy 26 degrees Celsius, and the clock is just like tick past 8. And March has actually brought its magic. Like the air is thick with the sweet scent of jasmine, and like every day as I go past my college, you can see the mango trees which are bursting with the unripe fruit. So there's like a delicious surprise which is waiting for us in summers. And even outside my window, I can see the usual nightlight of Bangalore. So yes.
Wow, I can only imagine it because I've only been to India one time, but it was exactly this time in 2020. So I was there until March 10th, which was I think the day before COVID was declared a pandemic. So I got very lucky to be able to see India right before the pandemic, and gosh, what an amazing place.
Thank you so much, Miss Callie. And I think that now that we have painted the picture, let's start right at the beginning. Miss Callie, what made little Callie a nature nut, and how has that passion evolved from childhood curiosity to leading the world's first entirely youth-funded nature preserve?
Okay, I'm really impressed that you did your homework there because you're alluding to my club that I started with friends in, I think, third grade or fourth grade. And we were called the Nature Nuts. And we had code names, like I was pistachio and there was an acorn and a peanut. And our goal was to raise awareness and advocate for issues facing and threatened species in the United States and around the world. And we actually raised money as well. I always have thought that kids can do something to fight back against these pressures that are threatening our wildlife. And I've also always thought that not only can we do something, but and not only should we do something, but that like it's within our power to actually do something financially. So we had dues. We had weekly dues. I think it was like 50 cents a week or something that we had to pay. But when you had extra money, like from a birthday or something, we always chipped in a little bit more. And when we eventually disbanded the club, we had something like $200, which we were able to donate to, I believe it was Defenders of Wildlife and the Sierra Club or something like that. And I remember we got a letter back from the CEO of, I think it was of Sierra Club, and just thanking us for our donation. And it really made me feel like, wow, I made an impact. They know I helped. And that belief in the ability of young people to do something impactful, and the recognition that older people find that valuable, whatever participation at whatever level, has really led me to where I am now. So I was lucky enough to grow up out near here with woods in my backyard. So I always had nature at hand. And I think that definitely shaped my experience of the world and the values that I place on nature, the intrinsic values that I think nature has. But I think how did that lead to creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve? Hopefully we'll get into this more specifically a bit later. But yeah, I think a kind of natural evolution from being in fourth grade and thinking it was time to do something, and continuing to see how biodiversity loss is impacting us, and continuing to believe in the power of every single person. So I guess we'll get into it more later, but that's the gist.
Absolutely, Miss Callie. I think that early childhood experiences that we have, they shape so much of how we see the world. And what stands out about your journey is that you didn't just admire nature. Pistachio and the other nature nuts, they felt responsible for protecting it. And a lot of people, they love wildlife or enjoy the outdoors, but a very few take that love and turn it into direct action. And Reserva was that passion, was that mission, which was inspiring change makers from around the world. And speaking about that transformation, Miss Kathy, you transitioned from learning how to design buildings to safeguarding ecosystems. So, what fundamental design principles from architecture do you apply to conservation even today? And how can students use design thinking to approach environmental challenges?
Yeah, I have a really unusual journey because my university degree was architecture, and I had a minor in urban and environmental planning. And I think when I got to the end of my 4-year degree at UVA studying architecture, I knew already that I didn't want to be an architect. But it was such a fascinating way to learn that I decided to stay in that degree program and continue with my education there. And I think the biggest thing I learned from architecture is the importance of space and how spaces actually shape the human experience, and how they shape not only what we can accomplish, where we work, how much space we have to store things, but also how they make you feel. When you have big windows, how they can make you feel like, oh, for some reason I can take a deeper breath. I feel more connected to the outdoors. Or when you're in a cramped space, it can make you feel more, closed up. And just the recognition that space has something to do with how happy we are. In fact, there's a book that I read when I was considering switching out and going into science or something, and it was called The Architecture of Happiness. It's by a British philosopher named Alain de Botton. And he talks about that, how the spaces that we're in actually matter. And I think that I took that theory and applied it to first book design with National Geographic Kids, and then into world design. What kind of world do we want to live in? What do we want our space around us to look like? And unquestionably, a more natural world is more natural to us. So how can students use design thinking to approach environmental challenges? I'd say read that book. It's a great place to start and recognize that the spaces that we're in really matter.
Definitely, Miss Callie. And like a few of my friends, they're pursuing architecture, and they always describe that, design, it should be functional as well as beautiful. Form and function, they should be working together and not against each other. So that's like a core thingy in architecture. And I think that conservation is not that different from it. Like in biology, we learned about a healthy ecosystem, which isn't just a collection of species, but it has like a carefully balanced system where every little thing has a role to play. And what's exciting to me is like how design students, they already think about space, they already think about balance, materials, spatial relationships, like you mentioned, Miss Callie. And these skills, they fit perfectly into conservation. So like you mentioned about creating better cities, greener cities, designing wildlife corridors can be one more application. Or integrating it into our urban spaces, like we had Dr. Margaret Lohman in our podcast earlier, and she talked about her tree top walkways. So over there, architecture, it has the power to shape a more sustainable future. And definitely, delving more deep into design, let's go to our next question. Miss Callie, as a senior designer at National Geographic Kids, you shaped how young readers engage with the natural world via their books. So, from a creative perspective, can you tell us how did you approach making complex environmental topics accessible and inspiring for children?
Okay, amazing question. So yeah, after my architecture degree, knowing I didn't want to do architecture, knowing I wanted to get closer to the natural world, I got so lucky to get a job at National Geographic Kids, which was a magazine I got when I was a kid, back when it was Nat Geo World. And being part of that team was I mean, it was the bomb. So the approach that I had and that we all had was, number one, don't talk down to kids. I remember being, in third, fourth, fifth grade or younger, and I was so annoyed when people tried to dumb things down for me, or when they talked to me like I wouldn't understand. I hated that, and I don't want that for anyone else. So when we try to communicate topics to kids, we don't talk down to them. We try to treat them as, very young adults, if you will, or people capable of comprehending um, ex, ex, complex topics. But you just have to change your approach of how you communicate them. So we have to make it fun. We had a really cool, vibrant color palette that would sort of, capture your interest. The design is really important, and kind of the way that I took what I knew about architecture and applied it to the page, because we were designing print media. Was you have to make decisions about the spaces you make, and then on paper the layouts you make. You are telling your reader where to start, where to go, how you want them to move through the space, or how you want them to move through the page. And we do that through hierarchy. So we would make one thing really big, and then the next thing, medium, and then the body copy is going to be small. And so you're telling kids, here's how I want you to digest this page. And when we made those decisions about what's the big thing, like maybe a big image or something, we actually used research-based decisions. We had a panel of kids. We had like 1,200 12-year-olds, and we would send them layouts, designs, and say, what do you guys think about this? Do you find this interesting? Which image do you like better? What do you like about it? And what we learned is that kids really like to connect with the images they saw on the page through eye contact. So we tried to use photos of wildlife, for example, where it's not necessarily just a beautiful stoic picture of an animal. They're connecting with you. you maybe have eye contact with that wolf or with that tiger. And we found that did better. So by using design and helping show kids, here's where you start and here's where I want you to finish on this page, to be able to digest this info. And then also using the visuals that will captivate them. And then hopefully, if you are communicating a difficult topic like climate change or biodiversity loss or pollution, that you also offer actions that they can do. So I think it's really important, not just for kids, but for adults, when you are talking about something scary, that you offer an off ramp. You say, like, I recognize you may be building up a lot of stress right now hearing about this. Here's something you can do. Go ahead and shut off learning if you want and just go do something, because it always makes us feel better to take action. So yeah, I think that was also part of how we made it inspiring for kids, was making sure they knew they could take action.
Absolutely, Miss Callie, and that's so fascinating to hear. And this again ties down to our previous question of, based on design. So it's all about design principles and the psychology of design. Like, I saw this post on LinkedIn in which, it was talking about how people, read through a particular page. So where the eyes go first, and you can manipulate those things using, different colors, using different sizes, and that's something which always fascinates me. And I remember that, even I grew up, reading through the Nat Geo Kids magazines, and I remember like how I used to see a single photo of a rainforest or an endangered animal, or the call outs, the speech bubbles coming out of them, and the interesting dialogues, a weird but true fact, and all of these things, they captured my imagination far more than statistics could ever could. And I think the personal experiences and the connect that we have with the particular page, the thing which is being communicated to us, all of these things are shaped through the images, the stories, and the kind of graphics that we use, even the language that we use to communicate the ideas. Like you mentioned, not using scary language to propose a call to action for young listeners or young learners. So all of these things, they tie down to making a good book which children can interpret, and also make changes in their own community. So I think these kind of things, they're also part of storytelling in a way, and it is which makes people act. And a big takeaway for our aspiring designers who want to get into this field is not using scary language, as well as being mindful about the principles of design. So colors, sizes, all of these things play a big role. And talking about feelings and what's at stake, making environmental topics accessible at a young age is super critical. Miss Callie, young people today, even if we make that emotional connect with them and they're taking some action, they're facing a paradox. On one hand, we are more connected than ever through technology, but on the other, more disconnected from nature than any other previous generation. And Reserva's mission includes, reconnecting youth with the natural world. So, what strategies have you found most effective in breaking through this digital barrier and reigniting that lost connection?
Okay, wow, great question. So kind of ironically, it was the digital connection that we have that really makes Reserva possible, because Reserva is an organization made up of, right now it's about 125 kids and youth from 32 countries.
I think we lost you a bit, Miss Callie. Could you just circle back to the point which you were saying?
Yeah, so Reserva is made up of about 125 youth and kids from 32 countries right now. And that simply would not be possible without this digital world we're living in. So the advent of Zoom and Google Meets was actually fundamental for us to be able to work the way we work and make such a global impact. So it's sort of ironic that we need it so much, and yet oftentimes uh, the digital world is what separates us from the natural world. So I think that one strategy that we found is use it as much as we can. One of the things that makes young people such a strategic group for fighting the nature crisis is that they have a grasp of social media and of being able to activate each other much more rapidly and more nimbly than generations before. And so when asking this question of why should we be going to youth to raise money for nature conservation? Well, half the world is under 30 or 31, and they're all on social media. And if we're not tapping into that incredible power that they have, then we're really missing out on one of the great tools that we have to solve the nature crisis. So using it is one thing. We did for example, a concert for conservation on Instagram Live with Olivia Rodrigo and some other amazing artists, and raised, I think our 2 concerts raised more than $4,000 for the reserve. And so being able to use it is as a tool is great. However, like you said, it's definitely the kind of thing, we've all been there. You spend too much time on your phone and then you look up and you realize, oh my gosh, what have I done? I've wasted so much time. So of course we try to design experiences or fundraisers that also get people out. So one of the things that we found effective is we have an annual fundraiser we do called Run for the Reef. And actually it started as Run for the Rainforest. Last year we did Run for the Reef. And it was a virtual 5K. And we offered every participant $5. We said, we will have our $5 to this conservation project for every participant. So if you are in India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Ecuador or Kenya, and you don't feel that you have $5 to give to register for this run, or $15 or whatever you can use to register, we've got you. Just get out there, get moving, and we see that as valuable. We value your time outside, and so we're going to put money into this because of your participation. So we try to do things like that get people outside. And almost always there's some added benefit to having done that. Like, for example, our last Run for the Reef, there was a kid in Dubai, Irfan Firouzi, who he's amazing. He's a youth council member, and he got several of his friends to go out there and do this run with him. And it's supposed to be just 5K. Well, they had so much fun doing it that they wound up running over 100 kilometers over multiple days, doing trash pickups, conducting bio blitzes, and having an incredible iNaturalist set of observations of the wildlife around them in Dubai. And other people in their friend group, the responses we got from them were like, oh my gosh, I just had no idea that this kind of life existed around me here in the city. Or it was my first time doing such a long walk and hearing the birds sing, and it opens people up. So I think setting up those opportunities and encouraging people to take them, particularly through things like a matching incentive, that's one of the strategies that we have. And yeah, if that answers your question. I mean, I do think also that meeting up in person is really important. So we're very global, and I wish it were possible to bring all 125 of us together in one spot. And unfortunately, it's just it would be incredibly expensive, and a lot of people wouldn't be able to get visas, and it's just not realistic. But every chance we get to get together in person and to talk about our mission in person, workshop things in person, or even just spend time with each other at a bar or at on a hike or something, anytime we go anywhere, has been one of the most valuable parts of my experience with Reserva. And it's enabled us, people from Ecuador and India and Pakistan and the UK, to have lasting, really real friendships, just because they use the digital methods to connect with each other while they had to. But the moment they had the opportunity to meet in person, it was able to cement lasting friendships. And I think friendships, relationships, real in-person relationships, those are the things that really help you get through the nature crisis. They're the things that help you keep going in life. So yeah, kind of a long answer.
Absolutely. Yes, but it absolutely, Miss Callie. I think, like you mentioned, technology, it can be a double-edged sword. And what's ironic is it connected us all. Especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, where we had no other means other than technology. It was the one which it brought us all together during those challenging times. But at the same, it also keeps us informed about different environmental issues. And definitely, social media has a huge, it's as a social media user, you have a huge responsibility. And but the ironic thing is it also keeps us indoors, disconnected from the very world that we are trying to protect. But if we use it right, technology can be a bridge instead of a barrier. Like you mentioned, social media, it has a huge power to generate relatability. We were talking about the design principles earlier, and in that you mentioned that that personal experiences and the emotional connect that you have with the kid, that's super important. And social media, it can generate relatability between people who are sitting, one person can be sitting in India, another can be sitting in Ecuador, another can be sitting in Argentina, and all of them, they just look at one reel, they only look at one meme. Okay, it can be based on nature, it can be based on other experiences that you have in school. So but that shared feeling that you have, that's super powerful. Nothing can beat that, honestly, apart from in-person connections. And digital conservation challenges, it adds another angle to how you can make use tech for good. Like citizen science projects, we participated in backyard bio, and that truly made games like Pokemon Go and Minecraft Earth feel basic. Like it was another level. Backyard bio, we did it during COVID, even after that. And I think that these kind of activities, they turn passive screen time into real world engagement. But in the end, like you mentioned, first hand experiences, nothing beats that. The moment that someone steps out into their gardens, into the backyards, into the forest, into their nearby jungle, when they hear the birds, instead of just watching a YouTube video, or plant something with their own hands and take care of it, and have their own vegetable garden, nature stops being just an idea. It becomes something much more personal. And that is when people feel that, okay, this is something I'm a part of. And this, if it's facing some crisis, if it's in danger, you feel that you have the responsibility to protect it. And that's when you can actually take actions by yourself without being told by people that you need to save this, you need to save that. So I think
I
that
have just one more thing to add. You just made me think of this. I think what's really fascinating about this current moment is that for all of the rest of human history, our culture and our experience of life has been so much shaped by the culture of the people around us. I mean, culture has been formed as a localized thing for the longest time. And so much of the conflict that we see, erupting around the world has to do with conflict of culture, right? Conflict of lived experiences based on where you are and the stories you hear and the realities you come to, to believe in. And I think what's so fascinating about and promising about the digital age and the fact that all of us are so connected is that we have, for the first time, an actual global culture. All of us, you and I have probably seen a lot of the same memes. Your friends and I have probably watched all the same reels on, and so we have these cultural touch points that we've shared that are, even though we don't live near each other. And so I think, to me, it's actually quite promising for the future in terms of peace building, because for the first time in history, it doesn't matter where you're from. You're going to have common ground based on your experiences through the digital world. So I do think that there are some promising aspects to it as well.
absolutely, Miss Callie. That's the power of relatability as well as humor. Like the memes, they have a certain thing which it touches upon. It's not direct. but you are able to understand, and the other person who might be commenting on that reel or who has made that meme instead, like they will be knowing and you will be knowing. It's a direct connection, but it's shared into this whole global space. And yes, we do have a global culture of relatability, and that's something that we can all use for, we can use it for good. That's why you should know how to use tech for good.
Yeah.
Well, Miss Callie, moving on to our next question. Let's say that students, they do step up and decide to take action. Generally, youth-led activism is dismissed as symbolic rather than substantive. So, how does Reserva counter this narrative and demonstrate that young people can drive real policy and conservation outcomes? And please feel free to share some aha moments that you've witnessed with the Reserva Youth Council.
Okay. Great question. So I think maybe it was around 2014 or so when youth-led activism really started to make headlines with Greta Thunberg doing her school climate strikes. And of course it agitated people, and they, some people had a negative reaction, what they see as symbolic actions. Well, I think part of the reason we started Reserva is because you see all of this anger, frustration, fear, passion, energy, and excitement about changing the course that we're on. But there were very few solutions-based options for young people to get engaged with if they wanted to, at least in my case, fight the biodiversity crisis. And of course, the climate crisis is another one. And so we designed what Reserva is specifically to counter that narrative, not only to other people, to, global world leaders and adults and whoever may be listening and thinking that activism is not all that important. And we wanted to show that young people are willing and excited to take action if you just give them the chance. And so we organized around this idea of creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve. That was just our first project, where we wanted to create a network of reserves like this. And the idea was to show people, to show grown-ups that young people can do more than just talk, and that we can do more than just protest the decisions that have been made by others. We can take direct action. We can create an entire freaking nature reserve if we want to, if we just work together. And so that's how we're countering that narrative to grown-ups. But there's a second narrative that I think is really important to counter, and that is the narrative that young people believe that they don't have they don't have the power to the real financial power to combat the incredible corporate greed that we see from around the world, or the forces that have made nature so threatened in the first place. And I remember when I had just started Reserva, I was at COP25 in Madrid, and I was standing in line for a coffee, and there were a bunch of youth activists around me. And there was a kid, I won't say his name. There was a kid standing in line with me at coffee, and these coffees were expensive. They were like €6 or something like that for a single coffee, but everyone needed it because it was so hot. It was brutal, those 2 weeks. And he said, "What do you do?" And I told him, "Oh, we're trying to create the world's first youth-funded nature reserve." And he said, "Oh, that's cool, but youth don't have money." And it was just, just like that. Why would you try that? Youth don't have money. And I remember thinking, how sad is it that this young person who is here in Madrid fighting for his future doesn't think that the $6 he's about to spend on coffee could actually do something. Those $6 could protect actually about 800 square feet of rainforest in the project we were starting at that time. 800 square feet, that's twice the size of my apartment. And once you make those connections and realize how far a little bit, I think it starts to make you believe in the power that we have, and to counter that narrative that we have for ourselves. So we try to help young people see the financial power that they have to make a real measurable impact for nature by protecting, actually protecting threatened biodiversity hotspots, not just through their ability to chip in $5, but by helping them recognize the stories that they tell, the actions they take have power over other people. They inspire other people to be generous and to donate. And a lot of the money that we've raised has come from people who just care about our youth council members and are like, well, that's amazing that you have someone in Pakistan who is, running 5K even to do this, even though they don't have the money to donate. Or it's amazing that you have people in Ecuador who are putting together video workshops to raise the money that they can. I could give that much. And they just donate it because they're inspired by us. So yeah, I think that's how we're trying to change the narrative and drive conservation outcomes at the same time. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Miss Callie, and I think that's what exactly makes Reserva's model so powerful. It doesn't only give young people a platform to speak; it gives them tools to act. Too often, we see that youth activism is seen as just raising awareness. They are trying to get likes. Okay, they are just talking. They're not taking action. That's the entire image which is built around activism. But when young people they are involved in tangible conservation work, when the actions that they take, it is visible. Okay, whether it is securing land or influencing policies or leading restoration efforts, when the action is visible, it changes all the narratives. And the fact that the youth at Reserva, like you mentioned, Miss Callie, they are making conservation decisions, and they're not only just advocating for them. It proves that the real change, it doesn't have to come from traditional power structures. You don't need to depend on super costly things. It can come from those who are willing to step up and build these solutions themselves. And
Yeah.
you talked about funding, Miss Callie. So and how you receive these things. So Miss Callie, youth-led initiatives, they're often at risk of being tokenized by companies as well, whenever they start these movements, because they're looking for positive PR, or gaining meeting their OKRs for their CSR activities and all those things. So how does Reserva maintain its integrity and ensure that its work always stays truly youth-led rather than becoming a tool for corporate greenwashing? And to build on that, could you share some best practices that young activists could use to protect their movements from performative environmentalism?
Yeah, of course. Okay, so first of all, I think that there is a misconception that corporate money drives everything. One thing that's really cool about being in the NGO space, about it like being in the charity space, is it's actually not true in our industry. So 67% of all charitable donations, at least in the US, just come from individual people. So I think when we started, I was talking to young people, and they said, well, like, why should young people donate money? Like, shouldn't it be the corporations who pay for the damage they've done? And I'm like, well, okay, you got a double-edged sword here. So should they be paying more for the damage they've done? Absolutely. Will you accept their money if they want to give it to you? Probably not. I'm guessing you're not going to accept money from Shell, are you? Because then you're going to be allowing them to greenwash. So which is it? Do we want their money or do we not? But in the philanthropic sector, only 7% of money, at least in the US, only 7% of the money that goes to charity comes from corporations. So it's a very little bit. And so for us, we haven't focused on it, frankly. All of our support comes from individual people and philanthropic foundations. So people who have, set money aside into a foundation, and then they use that to grant funds. That's almost everything we've ever received. I think we maybe have $1,000 ever from a company. So on the one hand, just practically, how do you prevent yourself from being a tool for greenwashing? Focus on the people who can support you. If you just focus on finding money from corporate sources, you're missing out on 93% of the available funds out there. But on the other hand, I think adhering to your mission and ensuring that if you do get the opportunity or get an offer from a corporate source to to accept their money and do something great with it, have a discussion with your board. Going to communicate this. How are we going to make sure that this doesn't influence the way we speak out against, for example, the fossil fuel industry or against any any interest that this source of funds might have? We haven't been faced with that problem yet, but if we do, I think that it would just come down to a conversation with the youth council of, should we accept this money? If so, what are the pros and cons? If we think that one of the cons is this company could use us to improve their image and therefore do more harm, then is it really a benefit to get that money in the first place? So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does, Miss Callie. And I think those are some real gems that you shared. I think one of the biggest challenges today for any youth-led movement is that the funding often comes with strings attached. Like you will get so many emails and messages that, we want to sponsor you. And, they will want to sponsor that initiative, but only if it fits their brand image or if you have like a good reach. And that can often at times dilute the original mission. But the fact that Reserva is people focused, it is human focused, and it is youth funded, that changes everything. It gives people the power to decide how the resources they are being used rather than relying on corporations and who might not have the same priorities. And of course, there can be issues of ethics as well in certain movements when such a time comes in their companies. So for that, obviously discussing with the advisory council, discussing with the board members, they can provide different perspectives on what is the right thing to do, what is the bad thing to do. And that's where the true, what I say, human intelligence comes into the pictures. Ethics, like today we have AI everywhere, but that's one thing which it cannot replicate. That's one thing that cannot be automated, the ethics part of our
Right.
society. And
I'll add something. I'll add something practical here. What can you what practices can young activists adopt to safeguard their movements? Make a gift acceptance policy. So this is something you can just get ahead of it by agreeing as a group, what kind of gifts would we accept? So you can, most organizations have a gift acceptance policy. So it'll say, we accept all gifts of cash, or like we will accept gifts from any corporate source that is not the oil and gas industry or the timber industry or something like that. So you can just say, hey, we agree on this right from the get-go. And we think that we could handle sources, we think we could prevent performative environmentalism from any sources other than these. And it can safeguard you from difficult decisions later if you just make that call up front. And you can post it publicly and say, this is our gift acceptance policy.
That's a big takeaway again for our audience members. If you have a movement and you're scared that in the future its mission could be at stake, so definitely gift acceptance policies is something that you should keep in mind. Thank you for sharing that, Miss Callie. And all these things, like when we tie it all together, like you mentioned, that level of financial independence in movements, it's kind of rare, but that is what makes movements like Reserva to stay true to its vision, and that can have a worldwide impact as well. So speaking of that, we know that Reserva has, as part of the 1 million letters campaign, it has collected 6,767 letters till date from young people advocating for conservation. So, Miss Callie, is there one particular letter or story from a young activist that left a big impact on you? And what did it reveal about the power of youth voices?
Okay, there are so many good letters that have left an impact on me. And yes, so this Million Letters campaign, for anyone who's not familiar with it, we knew when we started Reserva that, hey, we're going to be fundraising to create a reserve. That is not an activity that is going to be accessible to everybody around the world, all the kids around the world. There are going to be a lot of kids who don't have a personal network they can fundraise from. So we wanted to make a project that would be specifically designed to ensure that we were accounting for the contributions that these young people can have, particularly to inspire more philanthropy. So this Million Letters campaign, we said, if you write a letter saying what you love about nature and why world leaders should protect nature, we will match it with $3 toward the reserve. And that was enough for the first reserve. That was enough to create a classroom-sized area of rainforest, or to protect a classroom-sized area of rainforest. So really substantial. And I think that's why we've had so many thousands of letters from, I think it's over 60 countries at this point. Okay. And then we take those letters, we deliver them to the UN. We've delivered them at climate conventions and biodiversity conventions. And they're a great way for us to have a positive interface with delegations and with ministers, and to be able to deliver our policy stances or to talk about specific issues that concern us around our project, for example. Okay, so is there a particular letter or story that had a big impact on me? Yeah, there have been many, and I'll try to conjure a few. One of them was that I remember that just made me laugh was a letter from a young kid. I wish I had it out so I could get their name right, but it was a 5-year-old, I think. And it just said, I know about deforestation and I need it to stop. And it just made me laugh because it was like, it was like adults getting a dressing down from this 5-year-old, telling them like, hey, I know what you're up to. I'm going to need you to get your act together. There's another one that ended their letter saying, get your head in the game, quit it. And so there's this candid ability of kids to speak to world leaders that I think that is really powerful in helping them snap out of it, and remember the innocence of young people and who they're really fighting for. And then there are letters that have made me cry. There was a letter, one of the first letters we ever received was from Zane Libke, who's now on our board, actually. And it was when I first met him, I was speaking to his class. And in his letter, he described his connection to a patch of forest in his grandmother's backyard, and how anytime something was stressful to him, he would go out there and he would sit in that patch of forest, and it would help him. It would calm him down. And one day he went out there and there were bulldozers and they had taken down this forest, and he broke down in tears. And I remember reading that, and just, it ignites something in you, and you realize like we all can relate to this. We've all seen something like this happen, but to see it so communicated so clearly and so emotionally, in that appeal from Zane to world leaders, that I think was really powerful. And then the last one I'll share was there was a little girl from India who was 6 years old, and I think her name was Anaya. Shoot, I wish I had written this down. She was 6 years old, and she wrote the most incredible letter and illustrated it with a series of photo of like picture illustrations, almost like a little storybook. But the letter she sent with it, which was decorated with like gel pen, all sorts of, like, it was so cute, was so incredibly powerfully written that we had a 10-year-old with us at the UN Biodiversity Convention in Montreal, and he read it to one of the secretariat, so like one of the people who's organizing the entire conference, right? And he read it to him, and the secretariat said, "Oh my gosh, would you be able to read that letter at the closing ceremony of the entire UN CBD COP15, right before we vote to approve the global biodiversity framework. And so Robert from Canada got up on stage, and he was the first speaker at the closing ceremony of the most important biodiversity conference ever to have happened. And he opened with a letter from a 6-year-old girl from India. And it happened at Christmas time. That was when the conference was. And her letter talked about how trees are, she described them as gift boxes from God. And I'm not a religious person. Many people aren't, but many people are. So I think this really resonated with them. And I think even if you're not, you can see what this meant to her. But she said, she described trees and wildlife as gift boxes from God. And she asked world leaders, please do not unwrap them all. Please leave some for us. And I just thought that visual, especially around Christmas time, was so powerful, that looking out in the crowd of all of these delegates, thousands of people at the UN, there were so many people crying right before they had to take this important vote. So yeah, that the power of youth voices is manifold and unlimited.
Seriously, Miss Callie, I'm getting goosebumps listening to the power of a 6-year-old's voice through a letter. And I think that's there's no better example to demonstrate how young people, they aren't just talking about change, but they're driving it. Kids, they don't have filters. They are super honest. They are very innocent. They speak directly from the heart. And seeing a letter in their little handwritings, in their seeing the illustrations, seeing how they have communicated such complex problems in the simplest of terms, how they understand it, how they perceive those problems, and how they are connecting it with the experiences that they have had, their families have had. When a delegation who might be thinking from the perspective of their titles, when they read that letter, something, it strikes a chord. It makes a personal connection, and that's where real change happens. That's when something goes on in the mind, and they're like, no, this is much beyond just making a board. It's about doing something real. It has real impact on real people. It has impact on kids. And that having a single letter, it's super meaningful, but having thousands of them, that becomes undeniable. And like we talked about how young people generally feel that they don't have the power to do anything, but it's easy to feel that personal actions, they don't matter. But moments like these, they show that change starts with people deciding to speak up, whether it's through a letter, whether it's through a simple speech, whether it's through a campaign, or by directly taking action on the ground. It all adds up. Every voice matters. And that's for our young listeners who want to take action, and you want to write your own letter to the rainforest, you can head over to reservabilt.org/1 million letters separated by hyphens. And they also have a template for you to get started. So go ahead, write a letter to the rainforest, write a letter to all those delegations who are sitting at their places and who have the power to make global decisions. Your voice matters.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely, Miss Callie. And we are we're talking about Reserva's incredible impact. So now let's shift gears a bit and look through it. Look at it from the lens of economics. Balancing conservation with economic realities is one of the biggest ethical dilemmas of environmental work. Many communities who are living near endangered ecosystems, they prioritize immediate economic survival over long-term environmental health. So how does Reserva empathize and approach these conversations with empathy while ensuring that conservation remains a priority?
Right. So I think that the first thing that we have to do is recognize that conservation can be a priority while people can also be a priority. We need to start seeing local communities as part of the part of the solution to biodiversity loss. They are the people who are going to benefit most from biodiversity remaining intact near them. And it's important that that's communicated, that they understand it, and that they value it. So when we know practically, even if the only thing you cared about was the conservation of this wild space and the wild species that live there, even if you just took that, like that, wildlife centric of an approach, and ignored the needs of people altogether, we know from just history that when people don't have their immediate needs filled, they turn to the wild, they turn to nature, and they they extract from nature to be able to fulfill those needs. So in order for people to be good guardians of a conserved space, they have to have their needs filled. So when we approach doing a reserve, making a reserve near a community, it's really important, it's critical for conservation to understand what are the economic struggles that this community is facing. What about like health struggles? What food security struggles are they facing? Because these are all actually conservation struggles. If you consider that, when these people face hardship, they're going to need to cut down forest to be able to make the money to solve those problems, right? So yeah, I think that the first approach is simply don't blame people for any actions that they've already taken. There are a lot of people, there are a lot of amazing stories of people who were hunters, who were poachers, who were loggers, and have become some of the best, strongest conservation advocates that there are, some of the greatest guardians and park rangers that exist on this planet. And if you blamed people and don't give them the chance to turn their story around and to recognize value they might not have seen before in nature, for nature's sake, then we're missing out on some of our greatest allies. So we have to make sure we don't blame people for actions they've taken. We have to provide education about the values, the benefits that people are getting from nature, so they can join us in protecting those benefits. And then we need to help them respond when they do have needs. So for just as a quick example, the reserve we created or helped create in Ecuador, there was a landslide a year ago that killed multiple people in a neighboring indigenous community. And that really jeopardized the homes of several families. And even though this wasn't it wasn't a landslide that happened on our reserve. And so we could have very easily just been like, oh, we're so sorry for you. But instead we recognized, okay, with these people not having, having lost everything and even lost members of their family, the most likely scenario is that to rebuild, they're going to have to cut down forest. They're going to have to do damage to nature to be able to rebuild their lives. So it's actually a conservation action for us to step in and raise the money to help them rebuild their homes using more sustainable materials that were brought in without having to cut down forest. And so we raised enough to rebuild 2 homes for those families who lost their homes in that landslide. So yeah, that's how we do it.
Well, thank you so much for touching upon that point, Miss Callie. I think it's a really tough reality, because while we talk about saving forests and wildlife, for many people, the forest is also their home, it's their workplace, and it's their source of income. And that's where it's super important for the conservationists to move beyond just saying protect nature and actually work with those communities to create alternative livelihoods and make protection economically viable. Don't blame people, look at things from their shoes. And like you described, Miss Callie, rather than taking a don't touch this land approach, take important actions which are important for conservation. Like you mentioned about the Dracula Reserve in Ecuador. Is it the Dracula Reserve?
Mm-hmm.
The Dracula Reserve in Ecuador. And these local communities, they're directly involved in conservation. And definitely empathy plays a really important role in making these decisions. And thank you so much for shedding light on that point. Well, talking about what's at stake over here, funding is also one of the greatest barriers to conservation, and Reserva has taken an unconventional approach by engaging youth as funders. So, Miss Callie, what are the biggest lessons that you've learned about raising money for conservation, especially from people who may not be traditionally, they don't see themselves as donors?
Okay, I'm going to try to answer this question very quickly. When you hear the word philanthropist, are you imagining someone who's probably old and white? Maybe they have a monocle or something, and it's not someone who necessarily looks like you. Because if you are, you've got the wrong image. Philanthropy is most easily defined as when anyone gives themselves or gives selflessly for the public good. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to give your money. You might not have any, but you definitely have time. You have talent. You have a story. You have passion. You may have creativity. You may have connections. You may have a great reputation you'd be willing to give in terms of like your endorsement for something. All of these are things that people can give and to charity, and that is philanthropy. So the first step for us was recognizing that young people are uniquely qualified to be philanthropists in new and different ways from their older counterparts. So maybe not all young people have some money they can chip in. There are a lot of young people who do, actually. Maybe they have summer jobs or maybe they have generational wealth, and helping them recognize that giving is a practice that you can establish early on, and it brings you back a lot of value. I think is important, whether you're giving your time or your money or whatever. So, and then what we found, main lesson we learned was that in focusing on that and really trying to drive that point home, it actually wound up inspiring real financial donations from people who did have the means, but they were so inspired by the stories of young people, the creativity of young people, the efforts that young people went through to raise $100 or $5 or $10 or whatever dollars, and they were so inspired by that they gave what they could, which was much more. So we have collectively raised, we have collectively raised over $350,000 for nature conservation just through youth action, and we have mobilized just indirectly from our partners another $300,000 more or less from our partners. So that's a huge financial impact. And I think it's important to communicate that to people who don't see themselves as donors, that you shouldn't just be looking at your bank account. There's a lot you can be giving to charity that may not be your money.
Absolutely, Ms. Callie. And that's such a refreshing way to think about conservation funding. Traditionally, when we hear about environmental fundraising, we imagine these big grants, government aid, or even sponsorships at some times. But like you mentioned, it's about using our superpowers, the privileges, the resources that we have, our voices, our skills, and our networks to create impact right now. Each little action, it matters. And talking about little actions and skills, well, Miss Callie, as a wilderness first responder, you have been trained to handle life or death situations in some of the most extreme conditions. So, can you recall a moment where you had to rely purely on training and courage to respond to a crisis in the wild? And how did that experience reshape the way you approach leadership? Not just in emergencies, but in the long-term fight for conservation.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So yes, I've been wilderness first responder since 2022. And I would encourage anyone who spends time in the outdoors, or really honestly, anyone, anywhere, to seek training in first aid, or go for that, like further the first responder training, because it's empowering as a person, not just as an outdoors person. But okay, a moment when I had to rely on my training to respond to a crisis, had a couple. Fortunately, first thing I would say is preparedness is really important. So first, you want to try to avoid having a crisis in the wild, and to take the steps of thinking through what might happen while I'm out here, what could happen, and if it did, how would I respond? So before any of our expeditions, I do also have I go through that preparedness list of, okay, we're out of service. How am I going to communicate if we have, a landslide or a snake bite? And that's the work that you have to put in beforehand. But one time that we had a crisis in the wild was, I'm not going to name names or anything, but we had an issue in a marine expedition where, unfortunately, our boat captain lost his mother, and he had to leave us. And so we had to hire a different boat captain from the community who was recommended to us, but we didn't know. We didn't know as well. So we weren't confident already in his abilities. And unfortunately, that boat captain didn't have the same confidence in navigating these really rough waters that our captain had. And one of our two boats capsized when it was trying to land on the beach. It had this like really intense landing where the beach was here, and in order to get people off the boat, they basically had to go full speed straight at the beach and just crash like off these really big waves onto the beach. And it kind of feels like a mini car crash, like you hit the sand and everyone flies forward. And when this person tried to land their boat, they got scared at the last minute and turned, and it meant that the entire boat at full speed flipped. And so we had, and that was the other boat. And so when I arrived at the shore, we were behind them. When I arrived at the shore, what we found was a bunch of people who had just been in a boat wreck at high speed, landing straight onto hard sand. 3 of them who had clearly landed on their head or on their back, and people were bleeding, and basically it was like a big mess. And so in that moment, I had to kind of do triage and remind people that we have to take care of them before we go on and do our work, which was sea turtle related, doing something else. And of course, most people are like, no, I'm totally fine. I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of shaken up, but like, and yeah, I landed on my head or I landed on my back, but like, I'm totally fine. And I think before my first responder training, I would have said, oh my God, I'm glad you're okay. Clearly you're fine. You're walking around, you're standing up, you're not limping or anything. Thank goodness we got lucky. But because of this training, I knew, okay, high velocity crash, you did hit your head. We're going to do the kind of annoying thing of a full review and a full assessment where I press everywhere, touch everything, move everything, and make sure you're okay before I let you go back to work. And I think it was 2 of those 3 people actually realized that they had neck pain that they didn't realize they had. So when we did the assessment, they were like, oh, wait a sec, that does actually hurt. I didn't know that I had pain there. And long story shorter, they all wound up being fine. It was just whiplash, but it could have been much worse. And if we hadn't taken the time to respond properly and to say, hey, we're gonna just go ahead and do an assessment, even though you think you're fine, it could have been that someone actually had a cracked vertebra and didn't know it. That's totally possible. So yeah, I guess I had to rely on my training and trust that it was important to spend the multiple hours doing all those workups, and to, respond appropriately, and the courage to kind of tell people when they want to go have fun and they're like ready to forget about what just happened, that I have to say, sorry, no, you have to come in here and I have to give you a workup. Because that's not like, it's not fun to be that person. But it is important. So yeah, I'm not sure if that reshaped the way I approach leadership, but the training certainly reshaped, the initial training reshaped the way I approach planning an expedition. Much more, much more important to me to follow these processes than it was before. I'm sorry, that was such a long answer.
No, it's perfect, Miss Callie. And as you were speaking and sharing your experience, it made me think that, wilderness first response, it's such an intense skill set that, people should have. And it's fascinating to see, I was thinking that it does mirror leadership in a way. In both cases, you make critical decisions under pressure. The only thing is, if you're, doing leadership in conservation, lives are not directly at stake. There's no ticking clock, directly with people's lives. But in both cases, sometimes there can be limited resources, and the consequences, they're definitely real. So whether it's treating a serious injury miles away from the hospital, or responding to a conservation emergency, like there can be illegal deforestation in certain communities, preparedness, quick thinking, and clear decision making. These are the things which play a key role. And I imagine that having this training must shift the way that we all approach processes in our life and how we respond to different things. Definitely you won't always have the perfect solution, but you have to act anyway, and that's a skill that you can only learn from experiences. And it does remind me of our last episode, the previous one in December, around Christmas, which we had with an educator, our edu hero, Mr. Sean McLaughlin. And he shared his experience volunteering at the, if I get this right, East Sussex Wildlife Rescue and ambulance services, if I'm correct. I have to go back and check.
Sounds cool. I'm gonna have to go watch that.
Yes. So, even though I don't think you both have met or connected, but like these experiences, they do have a connection. And that's something which always fascinates me and all of our listeners at the SDG Warriors podcast.
Well, I think we've seen sadly, a big uptick in attacks on like wildlife defenders, environmental defenders around the world, especially in the global South. And so it is really valuable for people to get training in preparedness. And I think that one of the things that has reshaped the way I approach when I conduct one of these expeditions is the way I communicate those risks, those dangers. And so, for example, like, especially because I've taken people who are 18 into the field. I've even taken someone who was 14 into the field twice. And so we try to just bring adults, but special cases. But when you talk to someone who this is their first time in South America, it's certainly their first time in a rainforest, and you have to, they're 18, they can make their own decisions. One of the things I always do is I say, okay, I know you can make your own decisions. Would you be comfortable with us having a conversation with your parents as well, or whoever is your guardian, or whoever was your guardian? Because it's important that everyone understands the risks you are taking coming out here. Because as much as I hope that it is going to be accident-free, it is not risk-free to spend time in the wild. And so my approach is always communicate the risks very honestly. Because if anyone isn't actually comfortable sending their son or daughter or going themselves into an environment that does have real risk, then they shouldn't be coming. It's not good to say, oh, well, no, it's fine, nothing's really going to happen, because you can't promise that. So I have to tell people there are, we've had people get stung by scorpions. We've had people get bitten by snakes, fortunately not really venomous snakes. We've had, a boating accident. People have gotten lost. And fortunately, we've been able, because we had preparedness, we were able to get them home. And we've prevented people from getting lost by revising how we make sure everyone is using their apps and things like that properly. And there has been violence in these regions around us. We've encountered illegal miners while doing our work. And it's really important to communicate the real risks, but also to explain, here's how we are preparing in the event that one of these scenarios happen. Here's how we responded to previous similar scenarios. And without fail, every single time that I've had this conversation, someone has said, okay, thank you so much for clarifying that. Now I understand. I know it's risky, but I feel really comfortable with how prepared you are in that situation. So yeah, I think that it's really important not to disguise the risks of the work that we're doing, but to be prepared and to communicate honestly and openly about those risks.
Absolutely, Miss Callie. That's such an important point that you shed light upon. Definitely no one likes to be that person who talks that, oh my God, you're having so much fun and you're all pumped up and you're all confident to go and, go to some other place and travel and do these things. Nobody wants to be that person who stays stop. These are the different risks. And it just adds a kind of negative aura to the entire, vibe, if I could describe it in that way. But definitely, preparedness is key. Accidents are called accidents because, nobody expected them to happen. But we have seen cases around our world. We have seen cases in local communities. And if you know that there's a possibility something can go wrong, it's very important to be prepared because you never know, you can be the person who is unfortunately in that situation. But yes, preparedness is key. Absolutely, Miss Callie. Well, now let's shift gears a bit and have some fun. Miss Callie, are you ready for an incredibly energizing rapid fire round?
Okay, yes, of course.
Awesome. Here's the rapid fire round. So, first up, Miss Callie, as a photographer, imagine you had the opportunity to take a selfie or a grand group photograph with all the biodiversity that you have helped protect, whether it's the Ecuador's cloud forests, species present in them, or species across the globe. How would you visualize and compose the scene? Like, would it be panoramic, a rainforest shot, or an underwater coral reef moment? Like, what emotions would you want the image to capture exactly?
Oh my gosh, what a cool question. Okay, I know exactly what I would do. Okay, so there's this really cool lens called the LAWA probe, and it's like a wide angle lens that you can get really close up to something. And I think that what's so cool about a lot of the biodiversity we've helped protect is that it's very small. So we've protected some extremely small, very unique things, like orchids the size of my pinky nail, and frogs that fit here that live nowhere else on the planet. And so I think what I would do is I would get a picture using one of these probe lenses that gets really up close to a whole group of these tiny things, but it's a wide angle lens that shows the entire environment. And so I think I would get a group selfie with me and a bunch of kids from all over the world all together, but front and center would be all of these tiny little things. That's how I would do it. We'd be all in the background and they'd be right there.
I can literally imagine the scene. I can literally visualize the scene as we speak, and it sounds like such a dream to be in this ultimate conservation photo or selfie. And it really speaks to how interconnected everything is, right? That would capture the entire picture, and a picture speaks more than 1,000 words. It would be really cool if we could actually do that. Something to think about. And it does kind of remind me of Zootopia as well. So good connection. Well, shifting the gears again. Imagine if animals could design buildings. Miss Callie, which species do you think would be the most innovative architect, and what's one architectural marvel they'd create?
Ooh, whoa, hard questions here. Okay, first thing that comes to mind, I'm going to go to birds, okay, because we already know them as architects. And I think one of the most incredible natural architects is are caciques. And there are a lot of birds who build these like amazing dangling nests. And I'm not an ornithologist, so I don't know them all. But oropendulas and caciques and birds like this that have these really cool nests where they have an entrance at the top, and then they go in and the nest is actually like dangling down below. I think that we could learn a lot from the cacique about like cool concealed entrances. And they literally take the idea of a house and flip it on its head. And so that's the kind of creativity we need in designing our spaces. So I would go with the cacique.
And I think that's a really cool way to think about, those nature's architects. We don't really give them credit for all the effort that they put in. And I actually have like a potter wasp nest in my backyard. And like the first time, it just recently came. And the first time that I saw it, I was actually shocked and kind of scared and extremely puzzled, like who hung this tiny clay pot here? Because I wasn't aware that animals could build such perfect structures. But then I read about it, like I googled it, I did image search and all those things, and I learned that these are nests which are made by potter wasps. And all these things, like how these animals who cannot literally talk, who are not like getting architectural education like us, they're able to build these perfectly smooth and incredibly precise structures. Even beaver birds, I read a story in English that you have beavers who engineer wetlands, their houses in those. And definitely it inspires us to think about sustainable design, how these animals are surviving for millions of years. And maybe, just maybe, our biggest environmental solutions might already exist in nature, waiting for us to notice. Yes, one more reason to go step out and notice your backyards more.
Absolutely.
And like on that same note of creativity, Miss Callie, Johnny Flynn's music often tells stories of adventure, logging, and nature's power. So, Miss Callie, imagine you're walking through the rainforest and suddenly the trees start humming a Johnny Flynn song. So, what song would it be and why?
How did you know this is my favorite artist in the whole world?
We did our research.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Where? I don't even know. I don't know what to pick. I'm going to get this wrong because I know I would have like an actual good answer for you. I would just have to think about it. But there's a song that he does called "The Sun Also Rises," and it's a very, it's like a really hopeful song. I don't know, it like moves in the right direction, and it really makes you feel like good things are coming. And I think that that's what they would be humming. If I were walking through the forest, I think they'd be like, "Hey, look, the sun is rising." And it speaks to the movement of the people who are stepping up on behalf of these forests. Yeah.
I do need to add that to my playlist. I will listen to that.
Well, I
will-
have a Spotify playlist that you should follow called Best Songs, Johnny Flynn's Best Songs. And it's full of them. So you should go check it out. Yeah, I think he's an incredible artist. Yeah, I think one thing that I think is really cool, that I think the reason that I really like his work is because he's collaborated so closely with nature writers. And he did this collaboration with a poet named Robert McFarlane, an amazing nature writer. And if you listen to his music, it really it uses a lot of threads of nature, speaks about nature a lot in his work. And this collaboration they did this tour where Robert McFarlane would read a poem and then Johnny Flynn would play a song. And they did this entire concert alternating poetry song, moving you through a story that kind of encompassed the natural world. It was phenomenal. Yeah, I think that kind of creativity makes it really fun to be in the nature space.
Absolutely, Miss Callie. And music and nature, both of them, they tell such amazing stories. And maybe that's why so many artists, they find inspiration in the wild. Like Olivia Rodrigo. like I'm a Livy. So her song for which she was nominated at the Oscars, Can't Catch Me Now. In that, she beautifully describes each and everything, like how the wind is moving. You can find me in the grass. I'm everywhere, and it just paints such a picture for anyone who's listening to it. We also use that as the Instagram story that we put out for your episode. So definitely, music and nature, all of them are so interconnected. Well, Miss Callie, that was so much fun, and it's been absolutely inspiring to hear about your journey, your work with Reserva, and the impact of youth-led conservation. And as we wrap up this episode, let's reflect on everything that we have learned with the final segment, the Inspire segment. Well, first up, Miss Callie, who or what has been your biggest inspiration in life and why?
Okay, well, this is an easy one for me, and this is we're gonna get real here for a second. My biggest inspiration in my life was my little sister, who her name was Callie Broaddus, and when she was always like really into nature, but very passionate about climate action. And we grew up in a very conservative area that where most of the people we were around didn't actually even believe in climate change. So she felt very passionate about something, kind of very much of her own accord. And when she was 17, she was diagnosed with an aggressively fatal cancer. And she got really frustrated that when she was fighting for her own life, when she was getting her chemo treatments, she couldn't be doing work for the environment, which she knew was so critical. And so she decided to set up a fund to raise money to fight climate change. And she said, I've asked people to plant trees and all these things, and they've done it, but they still keep wanting to pay for my hospital treatments and things. She's like, what would really help me is if they'd be willing to donate to climate action. So she set this goal of raising $18,000 by her 18th birthday. And when she hit her 18th birthday, she had raised $70,000. And these are donations from people. Many of these people do not care about climate change. They don't even think it's real, but they do care about her. And they said, like, there were even comments that were like, I don't care about climate change. I don't think it's real, but anything for Finley, she's got my vote. And it was really motivating for me to see how empowering it was to her to be able to do something when she was, for what she cared about, when she was in such a fix, herself. And it really gave her a lot of life in those last couple months of her life. Unfortunately, Finley passed away when she was 18 on June 2nd, 2014. And she had raised over $100,000 at that time for climate action. And she had been able to give out her first several grants to the Greenbelt movement in Kenya, was one of the recipients, and a group called Cape Institute in West Virginia. That organization, that fund has continued to inspire people, has continued to inspire her local community and the people who knew and loved her to continue giving in the 11 years since she passed away. That fund has now given out more than $580,000 in grants to support climate action. And it will continue to give about $80,000 a year in grants. So she really inspires me because she took a really bad situation where I think a lot of people would have forgotten about the needs everyone else has to a healthy planet, clean environment, and focus on themselves. And she didn't distinguish between the two. She caring for the planet was caring for herself, and she was willing to use her story to inspire others to give. And that's really what gave me the idea for Reserva. Was I knew if one 18-year-old girl could raise $100,000 to fight climate change, then half the world being under 31 years old, like, what could everyone else do? And also, why aren't we giving them the chance to fight anxiety, depression, eco anxiety, these things that are it's really challenging to grow up in a world with these environmental challenges. Why aren't we giving them the opportunity to fight those feelings through action like this, through financial power that I know that they have. So, yeah, that Finley Broaddus is my biggest inspiration.
Well, Callie Broaddus, she's a hero for us all. Thank you so much for sharing that story, Miss Callie. And it's super inspirational how her determination created something so lasting and so powerful. And I think it speaks volumes that even in the most difficult moments, one person's passion can spark real change, even if people don't agree with you. You know, it's all about empathy, how people put themselves in the shoes of the other person, think from that perspective, and then they take action. It's all interconnected. Thank you so much, Miss Callie, for sharing that. And on that note, would you like to share some words of inspiration that were given to you that you would like to pass along to others?
Okay. This is great. This is good. Words of inspiration. Okay. Hang on. I actually have to think about this. The one that's coming to mind is something that my brother said to me. This is a terrible answer, actually, but the one that's coming to mind right now is something my brother said to me. I am really bad at like taking the time to work out, and part of my job, of course, like leading expeditions and being in the forest and or wherever I wind up being, I have to be physically fit to do that. And when I get home from those expeditions, all I really want to do is sit down and work on like editing photos, run the organization, all that. And I find it very difficult to motivate myself to go out and run or work out just for the sake of doing it because I know I have to be in shape. I'm really bad at it. So my brother gave me some great words of inspiration specifically for that. So I know this is a little bit of an about face from our topic we've been talking about, but he told me, Callie, there are 24 hours in the day. You can spend one of them on extending your life by working out. So that was a little bit of inspiration to me. It's important. Get moving, get outside, try to spend 1 hour a day doing something that extends your life. So I guess that's what I'm going with.
Definitely. When you're super passionate about something or you're, completely locked into, the stuff that you're doing, a lot of times you don't focus on yourself, you don't focus on your condition, you're just like, this is so amazing, I want to do this. It's very important to take out time for ourselves as well and take care of ourselves, because if we don't have a healthy body, then how are we going to function? And definitely right words at the right moment, it can become a catalyst for something big in the future. We don't know. And
Absolutely.
our last question for the day, Miss Callie, could you give us a call to action? What can we children and young people do to make the world a better place?
You bet. Okay. So obviously, send us your letter, join us as a fundraiser, many options there. But a call to action for everyone who's listening. Take a moment, take 20 minutes today to brainstorm, and try to think through what do you love to do? What are you particularly good at? What are some qualities that you think that you have? And then what do you care about? What's your story? And when you combine those things, you can find a really unique way to put your interests and your skills to use to make an impact for the thing you care about. And so, for like as an example, Lorena Patricio from Brazil, she is in school, doesn't have a lot of time to think about other things, but she does love to bake. She loves, and she's been baking bread all through the pandemic. And then she just realized, wait a sec, I really want to help move this marine project we have along. What if I just bake bread and ask my friends to donate? And if anyone who donates $10, I'll give them a loaf of bread. And she's raised almost $500 just doing what she loved, baking bread, and just sharing it with her friends. Andy Better has done the same thing by foraging for mushrooms. James McCullough did the same thing, doing bio blitzes in people's backyards. He just was like, well, I know a lot about bugs, so I guess I could go to my neighbors and bio blitz their backyards and give them a report of what life they have there in exchange for a donation. People who are, there's a girl who's super like active on Twitch, video gaming, and there are a lot of Twitch people who have like raised tons of money for charity just by playing video games. So it may surprise you what skill you have. It may just be that you are very good at communicating what you care about. That's actually the most successful fundraiser of all, is when you just ask people to help and communicate your personal story. But take some time, think about what's different about you and what you might be able to tap into that can make a difference.
Some real gems for our listeners today. And that's truly a strong call to action, Miss Callie. What's your superpower? What do you care about? And what is your story going to be? What's the story of Simmer? What's the story of Callie going to be? That's something that everyone should think about, using our unique skills or superpowers to contribute. Like, that really shows how action is not about just waiting for the perfect moment, but starting where you are with what you have. That's actually the core of being the change, our motto. So,
Yeah.
Callie, well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with our listeners today. Listening to how your work brings together creativity, science, and advocacy in a way that challenges the traditional idea of conservation and makes it like so much more accessible to young people everywhere. It was super inspiring, and it's been the best 1 hour 30 minutes in so long. I'm sorry if I took too much time out of your schedule, but
Oh, are you kidding? I took so long to answer so many of those questions, but you gave me such thoughtful questions. They were really amazing. So well done. Thank you so much for having me on, and thank you to anyone who hung on this long to keep listening to us.
Definitely, Miss Callie. Thank you so much. It was an honor. And to our listeners, I hope that this conversation has sparked inspiration, just like it has inspired me on how you too can take action, whether it's through like writing a letter, using your voice, or supporting conservation efforts, or simply reconnecting with nature. Every step matters, just like Miss Callie's journey showed us. If you want to dive deeper into Miss Callie's work, you can head over to her website at calliebroaddus.com. And you can also learn about Reserva, the Youth Land Trust, at reservavilt.org. Both the links will be available in the show notes. And to keep exploring this intersection of youth leadership, sustainability, and conservation, please subscribe to the SDG Warriors podcast for more thought-provoking conversations with change makers just like Callie, who are shaping a better world one action at a time. If you love this episode, help spread the word by leaving a review and sharing it with your friends, classmates, and family. Remember to stay curious and be the change. Until next time, it's goodbye from the SDG Warriors.